let's do this. Okay guys, so for today's video, I'm going to go down a list of 10 opinions that I have about high-end audio that may be a little bit controversial. And I say that because as I go down this list, I'm almost guaranteed to say something that you are not going to agree with. And you may be asking yourself, okay, then why even do this video? And the answer is to incite rage and to start a flame war. I'm just kidding. Actually, the real reason is actually going to be threefold. Number one, I'm inspired to do this video by something I did with Jay over at Next Best Thing Studio, which basically tackled some of these subjects. And then number two, I realize that there's a lot of people out there who want people like myself to be honest and transparent with you all, not just with product reviews, but with topics in the industry as a whole. And I feel like there's a lot of things that some people in the industry are just afraid to talk about. So I want to tackle at least some of that in today's video. And then lastly, I don't mind saying that this is something of a test to the individuals who watch my videos, because let's face it, most of us are very passionate about what we do. We're invested into the music that we listen to, and we're invested both monetarily and in terms of time into the gear that we use as a vehicle to deliver the musical goods. And through time, we even become emotionally invested into our opinions and observations as it relates to high-end audio. So the big question is, what happens when you come across an opinion that you don't agree with? Do you respond in more of an emotional way, or do you have more of a leveraged approach? Guess we're going to find out soon. Anyways, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down my list, and to be clear, I actually had to write down my main bullet points or else I wouldn't be able to keep track of things. And as with just about every Zero Fidelity video, it's not only unscripted, but it's all going to be done in one take. So let's begin. And the first item on my list is going to be, I like Bose. Don't get me wrong. Would I ever use a Bose 901 or a 301 for my main stereo system where I sit down and expect to get a realistic listening experience? No. But I think the products are good, especially when you consider what they're designed to do. The little Acoustim-S speakers in conjunction with the bass modules designed to give you big sound from a small profile. And it does that. And for the most part, it's very pleasing. A lot of their other more traditional stereo speakers are meant to fill a room with easygoing sound. And for the most part, that's what they do. In fact, I don't mind saying that if I were to buy a property and I were to say that, hey, this space is going to be like a game room, a social room where people hang out, maybe you play table pool or whatever, I would likely use a set of Bose 301s in that room than just about any other traditional speaker you can think of, because they're so good at that job of just spreading sound out into the room. And it's just full range enough to where it'd be enjoyable to listen to. And you can focus more on the people and of the experience than on the sound itself. So yeah, I actually do like Bose products. Not audiophile, but I like them just the same. Number two, Class D doesn't suck. Now again, would I use a Class D amplifier in my main 2-channel stereo system? Probably not. I still prefer the presentation of a traditional Class A, Class AB amp or tube amplifier. But I don't think they suck. In fact, I don't think they've sucked for a very long time. When I got into this gig in around 2003, 2004, that's when you started to see Class D amps enter the market, albeit through products like receivers. For example, I remember buying this Panasonic receiver, I think it was the SAX45 or something like that. It was around $299 at Circuit City. Anyways, this receiver that used Class D amplifier actually not only ran pretty warm, but it had a very warm sound to it. It definitely didn't have that classic clean yet kind of thin presentation that most of us know from Class D amplifiers. And it was pretty good. I also had the Sony, I forgot what the model number was, but it was an SACD player built into an integrated amplifier. I think it was more like $599 or $799 at the time. One of my friends called it the Magic Box because he actually bought it, and he had the Plinius 8150, and I forgot what his source was, running some very expensive Piega speakers, and he bought it because some people were talking about how good it was, and he got it thinking, it's probably gonna suck. And then he was like, oh my God, I actually think I like it better than my audiophile grade separates. So I tried it, and at the time, I think I was running a Lecter CD player, and I had the Rotel, the flagship preamp at the time, and their flagship amp, the big Class A B amp. I think it was like the 1090, 1095 or whatever. And I actually, in some respects, preferred the little Sony. It was more detailed. It was more airy. There was just more control over the speakers. In fact, I remember one day I was listening to it, and my parents, yes, I lived at home at the time, my parents who were downstairs actually came up and said, "Sean, we've never heard details coming from your system like this. Like, what did you do?" And it was just that little integrated Class D amplifier. Now, ultimately, I got rid of it because I still preferred that body and warmth of a more traditional topology. But the point is this: Class D has actually been all right for quite some time, and it's just gradually getting better and gradually getting better. So I don't think it sucks. Definitely not for everybody. I wouldn't mind using it in my secondary system, but it's still not to the point where I'd use it in a main rig, but it doesn't mean it's bad. The next point is going to be the most controversial in this video, most likely, and that is cables. To me, cables can matter. And I don't mind saying that when I got into this gig, I thought it was just complete BS. When you just looked at it from more of a common sense perspective, you looked at the internal wiring of a speaker, and then you looked at the crossover network, the internal wiring into PCB of the electronics and all that. I was like, how can a wire make a difference? How can the short wire have any kind of an impact? Because whatever impact it has should be compromised the second it hits the terminals. It changes conductor material, number one, and then it has to go through to this PCB. At that point, it should be done. Differences shouldn't matter. All you need is a cable that gets the signal from point A to point B with as little coloration or little alteration or loss in this case as possible with decent shielding, right? That's all that really matters. And I remember trying out a few different products because even though I had my thoughts on it due to distant observations, I don't feel like there's a replacement other than real-world experience, right? Especially when it comes to something like high-end audio. So I tried out a couple products. I brought in Kimber 4TC, Kimber's 8TC. I remember bringing in some cables from Monster, MIT, a whole bunch of different cables, and I compared them to my standard 12-gauge speaker wire that you could get at like Home Depot. And for the most part, I couldn't tell a big difference. I would say I thought I heard a difference between the Kimbers, like it was a little faster, a little more detailed, but it wasn't that big of a difference for me to justify the difference in price. So I was like, whatever. And then one day I tried something from Audience, who was a new company at the time, and I was like, whoa, okay, there's a huge difference there. And I brought over my friends, they heard the difference. And I remember even after that, I was messing around with somebody's stereo system. They had like a Sansui receiver, some DIY speakers, and I replaced their mediocre cables with some Radio Shack Golds, and the difference was so substantial we were all shocked. So that point onward led me to basically believe that, you know what, I can't always explain it, even when you look at the parameters of resistance, capacitance, inductance. All of that is measurable, as is noise, but even then, like, I just had to accept that, you know what, there's times to where it can absolutely make a difference, and it's something that you just need to try. Now, at the end of the day, though, it's high-end audio. I feel like it's definitely worth trying out, and if you try it out and you feel like it makes a positive impact, cool. And if you feel like it doesn't, that's fine too. It's just hi-fi, who cares? Anyways, let's move on. Most people want to be sold something. So this is another potentially controversial opinion. Here's the bottom line. When it comes to reviews, a neutral review absolutely will not move the needle in any way. And what I mean by that is, even though so many of you out there claim that you want honesty and you want pros and cons, the real truth is you can't take the human element out of the buying process, because when most people see a neutral review, like, hey, here's a product, here's the good, here's the bad, conclusion is this is a good product for people who like this, most of you interpret this as being a mediocre review. And when you're investing your money into something, especially if you can't audition at first, you don't want to buy something that you perceive as mediocre. No. You want to buy something to where there's the promise of amazing performance for your investment. You want the best, or at least you want something that's considered to be among the top tier of a given category, whatever your budget may be able to afford you. And this is something that you just can't get away from. And the opposite holds true with negative reviews. A lot of people like negative reviews because, again, it draws a definitive line in the sand. I should buy this or consider buying this, or I should not consider buying this. People want to be sold on something. They don't always want to make the decisions themselves. Now, I do realize that there's going to be plenty of you saying, well, Sean, I'm not like that. I'm not like that at all. I don't trust just any one review. I look at a kaleidoscope of reviews, the opinions of people like yourself, and then I go to forums and look what users have to say, and over time I collect this data, and then I make a decision. And you know what? That's great, but not everyone does this, and not all the time. A good example is, in fact, I actually mentioned this on the video with Jay. If you're buying, say, a toothbrush on Amazon, unless you are just really familiar with that type of product, what are you going to do? You're on Amazon and you have a pack of toothbrushes that retail for like $10, right? And it has 3.5 stars reviews, about 30 people have reviewed it. Are you going to go with that, or are you going to go with a product that looks very similar, the same general price, only this product has 4.5 star reviews and it's been reviewed by thousands of people? Odds are, especially when it comes to toothbrushes, you're just going to go with the product that promises to be better, whatever better means. Now, obviously, this is kind of a loose example here, but you get where I'm going with this. Most people just want to be sold something. Not everybody, but most do. That's why only rave reviews tend to matter. Rave reviews are the only thing that are going to inspire somebody to make a purchasing decision. Anyways. Speaking of reviews, next point. Honest reviews are okay, but I value reliable reviews. So many people out there, and I see it all across the board, commend others for producing an honest and genuine evaluation. And I can do the same thing. I can commend people for being honest. But honesty means nothing to me if I feel like that person isn't reliable and useful to me as a consumer. And what I mean by that is I will more attach myself to somebody who knows what they're doing, and I feel like their experience with a product time and time again seems to line up with what I also run into with the same products. And sometimes the adverse is true. Sometimes I am so different from another person, it's like our ears are wired out of polarity to where if they love something, I know to probably stay away from it. Whereas if they hate something, then I know, hey, that's something I probably like. So for me, the reliability of a reviewer is far more important about how honest they are. But that's just me. Moving on. It's easy to get bad sound, but it's difficult to get good sound. Let's just have a real conversation, guys. Our hobby is like facing a series of uphill battles. Number one, the music that we listen to, I would say 85 to 90% of the time, was never meant to be experienced on a high-end 2-channel stereo system. It just wasn't. Ergo, oftentimes it's not going to sound amazing on a system that's meant to be highly resolving. That's the first problem. Number two, almost none of us live in a home that was designed with good acoustics in mind. In fact, usually it's just the opposite. No architect really considers acoustics, and most of us have rooms that sound like crud. Those are two big problems, right? So the music that we listen to wasn't really designed for our consumption, and then the rooms that we have to work with aren't really designed for us either. And then you have a whole host of other variables. What about synergy? What about how this amplifier matches with this speaker? What about how this music can pair up to the whole kaleidoscope of different options? What about setup procedures and all these other different things? I mean, it becomes so complex that it's easy to spend money and get bad sound for your investment versus spending just a little bit of money and getting really good sound. And why is that? Well, it's because most of the affordable components out there aren't really that resolute. So they're not transparent enough to really show off all the bad that's happening within your components and or the recordings, but they're just good enough nowadays to where it's still fairly resolving, and it's this nice sweet spot to where, say, $500 bookshelf speakers on a $500 integrated amp with a decent source may actually outperform a much more expensive system, not because the expensive system is just a ripoff, but more because it's just easier to get good sound out of that affordable stuff than the more expensive gear. Because as this gear becomes more expensive, more resolving, that's when you actually need knowledge. You need to know what you're dealing with, you need to know your circumstances, and you need to understand how to piece together a system given all of these variables. And very few people actually know how to do that and to do it well. So that's why I say it's very easy to get bad sound, but very difficult to get good sound, especially as you spend more money. Moving on. Okay. Few measurements are useful. I need to be careful with this one. When you're designing a product, measurements are absolutely fundamental to the process. But when you're a listener, or when you're a consumer and you're looking at a review or reading a review and you want to see the measurements, I've come to find that very few measurements that publications post up are actually relevant to what you're going to experience, because most people want to see a frequency response graph, which is borderline useless because how that product measures in one person's room isn't going to translate into how it measures in your space. It's just the easiest thing that we have to latch onto because you don't really need a degree in acoustics in order to understand that kind of graph. The only way that those graphs can really become valuable is if you, in this almost fantasy world, get like 5 reviewers who have the same testing equipment. They are very competent in how they measure the performance of a product, and they can all produce results that are very reliable in the sense that that they're true to what's actually going on in their rooms. What you can do is you can collect that data together, look at those frequency response charts, and then begin to get an understanding, or at least to set an expectation as to what you may experience in your own room. But by and large, that and waterfall plots, that stuff doesn't really mean much. In my opinion, what is important is, let's say on the electronic side, let's look at the output power of an amplifier. I think that's pretty important. Is the manufacturer lying? Are you going to catch them with their pants down? Does it really output the kind of power that the manufacturer claims? Or is it the opposite? Is it actually a more powerful amplifier than what the manufacturer claims and they're being conservative? Or is it more or less in line with their actual published rating? I mean, that is important. And then on the loudspeaker side, impedance behavior. Where does the impedance dip and for how long? Right? That's going to have a direct impact, especially the overall sensitivity of the speaker. That's going to have a huge impact as to what kind of amplifier that you need to safely drive that particular loudspeaker. So measurements like that to me are very important. Most of the others, though, it just doesn't really have a bearing as to what you're going to run into in your situation with all the variables that there are to consider. Anyways, moving on. Okay, expensive parts aren't always better. So let me give an example. Let's just say a crossover network. Throwing in a Mondorf silver capacitor over, say, a Binnick isn't necessarily always going to result in better sound or even better performance. In fact, there's a lot of times to where that more expensive component can sound a lot worse than something that's less expensive. What's far more important is the competency of the design. It doesn't matter whether it's a filter network on a speaker, whether it's a circuit on an amplifier or preamplifier. The actual competency of the design just far outweighs throwing expensive parts at something. And it's an aspect of design I wish more people would understand, because I think from a viewer's perspective or a reader's perspective, it's just easier for the brain to say, hey, look, that uses expensive resistors and capacitors. That's a high quality product right there, without actually knowing anything about a crossover network. And let me tell you, most of you watching this video right now, I can imagine that 0.5% of you, if I showed you a crossover network, you would actually be able to identify what's going on in the crossover, let alone to identify any potential weaknesses and so on and so forth. So don't always be confused by fancy parts. Doesn't always mean better sound. Okay, moving on. This is the second to last point, so we're almost done here. Trade shows are a horrible place to audition gear. This one kind of breaks my heart because, let's face it, auditioning most of this stuff that we read about is almost impossible. It really is. And trade shows seem like that one venue you could go to where you can audition all this stuff that you've been reading about or reviews that you've watched on YouTube. You can finally get your hands on it, you can listen to it, and you can then make a decision. But the problem is that these environments are awful for gauging the true performance of something. I mean, number one, you're usually going to be in a crowded room with a bunch of people, and or there's going to be somebody talking over you, or the music's going to be unfamiliar to you. The system that you're in is in a hotel room that the person running the room had maybe 48 hours or less to set up their system in that room. And there's all kinds of other issues going on. So really, you're only getting a glimpse at what that system is capable of. And half the time, most of the credit goes to the speakers anyways. But the adverse also becomes true. Sometimes you're going to hear sound that's so good at a trade show that it's going to be very difficult to replicate in your own environment. Let me give you two examples. Magnapan with the LRS. When they show it off, they're very smart. They move the speakers far away from the wall, like 4 feet, maybe 3.5 feet from the rear wall. They're running high-end electronics, a really powerful amplifier. How many people are going to be doing that or are even capable of doing that with a set of speakers that are well under $1,000? That's typically a different demographic that just doesn't have that kind of money to spend. Ergo, if you're lucky enough to get a quality demo of that speaker at a trade show, especially if it's in a room that's not very full and you're in the sweet spot, you're going to be very impressed because it is a really good product. But are you going to get that kind of sound out of it? Probably not in your own home. And the same holds true for ELAC. When they started off showcasing the debut series, the original speakers, which I think were like $269, $299 at the time, they would connect them to very high-end gear from Audio Alchemy. It was like $6,000+ worth of electronics. But again, most people, they turn their attention to the speakers. So when you run into this room that's very well set up with a very, refined demo of only like 10 repetitive tracks, you're going to sit there and you're going like, oh my God, all this great sound from something that's only $299? Oh my goodness. And it was very effective. But how many people buying those $299 speakers are going to put them that far out into the room and run $6,000 worth of electronics and only listen to the same 10 tracks? Probably not that many of you. So when you go to a trade show, have fun with it. It's more of a social gathering than anything else, but don't think that going to a trade show means that you've had this definitive audition of components. And lastly, lastly, it all sounds fake anyways. Now, I made a video about this. I'm not going to go on and on, but in my opinion, everything that I've ever heard sounds fake. I can't even think of one system that even remotely sounded realistic to me, maybe outside of very simple music. And you know what? I'm okay with that. And I'm okay with it because what it does is it can knock out some of the pedanticness of this hobby, or that little inner voice that always says, yeah, but it's not good enough. Yeah, but it's not good enough. Maybe if you change this, you'd bring out more of this element of the presentation. Because I've suffered from that for many, many years. And when you finally accept that it all sounds fake, all of a sudden, all these passionate arguments from people about cables and about, oh, tubes are great, or tubes suck, or Class D is great, or Class D sucks, all of it just becomes, it almost seems like little children bickering about innocuous things that don't matter, because it really doesn't matter. It's just hi-fi. And then you realize, despite all of these strong opinions, it sounds fake anyway, so it's like, why even get that riled up? It all sounds fake. Just pick what you enjoy the most and then live with it. Be happy. Anyways, that's gonna be my 10 potentially controversial opinions. I'm stumbling over my words here, so I think now is a good time to wrap up this video. Guys, I look forward to your feedback below. If you're feeling bold enough, by all means, feel free to come up with your own list. And let's see how everybody responds to this. Can this be a respectful experience, or are people going to just tap into their more monkey-like DNA and just fling you-know-what at one another? Guess we'll see. Anyways, guys, as always, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.